Depression, it has been said, is a reflection of the soul's internal misery, its inconsolable sadness. It is much like a house in disrepair, where rooms are shattered and broken. Rather than examine this sadness by becoming introspective, we run from it. The pressures of life summon us to carry on as if everything was just fine. In the 1980s, SSRIs were introduced to help us do exactly that. But there is mounting evidence that in American society, at least, everything is not all right. We may have in fact become too dependent on pharmaceuticals to handle both the pressures of growing up and the deep sense of remorse and hopelessness that is so pervasive in our culture. Are we witnessing a rising prevalence of individuals that are troubled by a greater remorse of conscience? Claude de la Colombière, a 17th century French Jesuit priest, writes about the need to be in tune with the conscience, which many understand to be one of the main portals to a deep interior life. But de la Colombière does not mince words in regard to the harshness of that conscience that stings when we go astray. If indeed this is what the conscience does when we falter from the virtuous paths, then is it not surprising that we should rely on medication to quell this tempest that rages from within? The use of antidepressants, specifically SSRIs, increased fourfold, starting with Prozac in 1986, Zoloft in 1991, Paxil 1992, and Celexa in 1998 for major depression. In 1994, the FDA approved Paxil for obsessive-compulsive disorders. In 1996, Zoloft received approval for panic disorder, and in 2002, Paxil, Zoloft, and Lexapro were also approved for panic disorder.
When we look at the extent of the use of antidepressants in our society, and it is extraordinary. There's some recent data that says 11% of Americans over age 12 now take an antidepressant on a daily basis, which is really extraordinary.
And so some people argue that treating depression with medication aggressively and early is going to prevent that cell damage that may prevent future bouts of depression. Some people say that use of antidepressants results in a temporary change in brain chemistry.
What is going on that antidepressant dependence is increasing? Many seek the assistance of antidepressants to help manage the internal suffering and turmoil. But nobody appears to be treating the root cause, only the symptoms. So what exactly are these psychotropic drugs doing to the neurocircuitry of the brain? Robert Whitaker, author of Anatomy of an Epidemic, describes how the SSRIs work.
We try to assess the history of understanding of how psychiatric medications affect the brain. You see these different classes of drugs. First, the antipsychotics get studied, and then it's the benzodiazepines, and then the antidepressants as well. And the history goes for each one goes like this. First, they understand how the medications act on the brain. And one of the first was with the antipsychotics, Thorazine and Haldol. They learned that they block dopamine receptors. Then the next thing they see is how does the brain respond to it? And they begin to understand it produces an opposite response. So with antipsychotics, they block dopamine receptors, which is a brake. The brain responds by putting down the accelerator. That's the second thing you see in history. The next thing you see in history is this worry about the disorders becoming more chronic, including psychosis, schizophrenia, anxiety, depression. Over the long term, you're seeing a shift from less episodic problems to more chronic problems.
A data health management firm, IMF Health, estimates that in 2007, pharmaceutical sales of antidepressants in the U.S. topped $11.9 billion, an amount that should cause alarm. Also, consistent with these findings, the CDC 2010 report documents a 400% jump in the use of antidepressants between 1988 and 2008. The talk of treatments and remedies for depression remains centered on the prescription of antidepressants. But is this strategy wise given the addictive nature of these types of medications that appear to entrap individuals into a chronic form of depression?
since the arrival of these new drugs, antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety agents, has the burden of mental distress in our society really gone down, or has it gone up? And what you find is, and if you just look at the marker of people under government care due to mental illness, it has gone up steadily since the arrival of these medications.
This is only the tip of the iceberg. Indeed, whereas the average age of onset depression in the 1960s was 29, recent statistics indicate that more numerous cases of depressive disorders are being documented as early as 14 and a half years. What is going on? Lucy Russell, the head campaign chief for the Young Minds, a mental health charity, expressed concern and alarm about these statistics. She admits an increase in under 11s needing mental health services is a sad and very worrying indictment of the society we live in and the pressures children face.
And then, if you were to look at what's the common denominator that allows then the adults and the children to be profoundly social people, it's because there's either no or little TV in the home. There's either no or very little use of the computer except for necessary things. And there's family dinner every night. And the marriage of the mother and father is solid, and there's an openness to life and an experience of life because they're having children, and the children then obviously assimilate this culture of life to where the whole family then becomes a beehive of life.